I grew up in the savannah, so flat grasslands. Mountains were not things that we were familiar with. But I came here, saw the mountains, and I'm like, maybe my ancestors had been here before, because it was just an immediate connection. There is history in the mountains. There is knowledge in the mountains. There is adventure in the mountains. We should also look at the mountains as spaces of endless possibility. So we need to look at mountains as that.
I studied the Drakensberg as a high schooler in Gabon, where I come from. I'm an environmental scientist. When I applied for the position that eventually took me here, I had to go and Google the place. The first time we got here, what struck me and what was present were those mountains. And I got emotional because of the beauty of the place, and I was blown away. Upon joining the university nearly 10 years ago, I decided to study the quality of the water of the rivers of the region. I'm kind of known as the water guy here because of that.
The study that I do looks at community well-being. You can't separate the mountains from the communities that live in the mountains. So there is a historicity embedded in mountains, mountain cultures, mountain identities, which are quite important in defining the lives of the people from Qwaqwa.
My name is Tolo Mopedi, from the Bakoena Royal family. I grew up here in Qwaqwa, in Bochabela village. Bochabela village is in Mabulela. Mabulela is one of the 7 districts belonging to the Bakoena tribe here in Qwaqwa. We arrived here in Qwaqwa in 1868. Our great-grandfather, Ntatemolo Paulos Mopedi, moved from Lesotho to Qwaqwa. Actually bought this land from the then President Brandt, president of the Orange Free State. Qwaqwa is very well situated in our country. You know, the location here is beautiful. I mean, we are at the border of the Golden Gate Nature Reserve, at the border of the mighty Kingdom of Lesotho, Kingdom in the Sky, and KwaZulu-Natal just behind me. Qwaqwa is somewhat shaped as if it is a dish. In Sesotho we say sootwana, surrounded by the mountains, and we the people are inside the dish. The security you feel, you know, if I move anywhere further from Qwaqwa, I kind of feel insecure. I look around for a hill somewhere so that I can kind of familiarize myself and feel more at home. Mountains for me are a great refuge.
Personally, the mountains for me, they mean my heritage. I grew up hearing about the stories of the important historical moments that happened, and then also growing or going to visit cousins outside of town, I got to appreciate the landscape that I came from, because where I used to visit, there were no mountains.
When I would visit my family in Gauteng, they wouldn't have any mountains, and I'd be like, is this how people live outside of Qwaqwa? And I found it very interesting that home for me meant mountains, always.
So the mountains in this region, they've played a very significant role in history and social histories and kind of the formations of people. The area was, of course, originally settled by the San peoples, And of course, the name Qwaqwa, loosely translated, means whiter than white. It's inspired by the fact that those mountains quite often get snowfall, and quite heavy snowfall. In the late 18th, early 19th centuries, people fled into the mountains of the Drakensberg, the Maloti for refuge. That was in large part because of the quite violent emergence and expansion of the Zulu kingdom. And of course, out of these processes was eventually born the mountain kingdom of the Basotho. And still to this day, you have the Basotho and Qwaqwa kind of royal houses on the Qwaqwa side of the border.
Now, Morena Motebang is the husband to our current Queen Mother, Mufumahadi Matukwana.
It was my late husband who made me fall in love with the mountains. So I found the mountains to be a very peaceful environment, a holy environment. You can find everything there. You find God is present there. Even when you go up on the mountain to pray, you can't help but feel that you are closer to God.
We know that the Drakensberg and the Malotis, because of their beauty, they have been a kind of tourist magnet. So they attracted a lot of kind of white colonial interest as well, of course. For instance, in 1947, during the well-publicized royal tour, Queen Elizabeth II was still Princess Elizabeth, and it kind of becomes this sort of colonial playground. So the royal visit is part of that. It kind of reinforces that as well.
With the Basotho, the various clans wear various different blankets. Like this one is called the Bakoena. We used to use the cow hide, or the skin of the cow. And then later, when Lesotho was colonized, one of the first blankets like these ones were called Queen Victoria, Lifitori, and it was an import from England. And that's how Basotho kind of got this blanket into their culture. I live at Bochabela village, and the very iconic Qwaqwa mountain is really in my backyard, and that is the village where I'm working as, or called to be, a village chief on. So I spend quite a lot of time on that mountain. Yeah, apart from me just sitting there and meditating, I'm a father of 3 kids, so sometimes you need some time away to go and de-stress, maybe looking over Qwaqwa as well. It's just a beautiful view to have, looking at Qwaqwa from the top of the mountain.
We came here when I was 3 years old, so I remember just seeing mountains everywhere. The iconic Qwaqwa mountain is, as I step outside the door, that's what I see. We never referred it as Vetsizuk or Sentinel Peak. It was always Mount Exos. So my grandfather would tell us that in Mount Exos there is this snake that has 7 heads, and when it lays its egg, or it's going to find its partner at Sterkfontein Dam, it will get very misty around the mountains and around Qwaqwa. So we should stay indoors and let it pass, because if it sees you or if you see it, then he would never tell us what would happen, but he's like, yeah, you can't see it. So it was always what I had growing up. And when I became into academia and started coming and doing research up here, I was like, where is this 7-headed snake that we were told about so much growing up? I did my undergrad in Wits in Gauteng, and I came back for a master's project, mainly related to that because mainly it was at home, and I was like, yes, I get to come back home and do research in our mountains and looking at the biodiversity of some invasive rosacea shrubs. So they have taken over most of the mountains, and it has changed the composition of the ecosystem in terms of the type of birds that we find, the types of animals that we find, the types of rodents that we find.
My favorite thing about the mountains is how it influences the weather. We get to experience snowfalls in winter. This part of the country, we get to experience cool weather conditions in the summer season. So I love that about the mountains. Mountains have been there for years, millions of years probably. We tend to take them for granted. We think they would always be there, but the truth of the matter is the state in which these mountains are in is changing because of the changes in climate. We're seeing a lot of natural resources such as medicinal plants, grazing lands, firewood being harvested quite vigorously at a rate that the land cannot recover. As a result, we're seeing these natural resources depleting in our mountain landscapes. At some point, we will not have any to even claim or to experience.
Qwaqwa, interestingly, is actually the smallest homeland of the 10 that are established under apartheid's policy of separate development. It's only about 650 square kilometers in 1974. The total population of that region sits in the region of about 25,000, 30,000 people. And by the late 1980s, it's 400,000. So in a relatively short space of time, you've got this massive population growth, and it's engineered. And so effectively what it becomes is it's this kind of a dumping ground for people who are being displaced through Group Areas Act and other apartheid policies. A large proportion of its so-called gross national product was actually made up of migrant wages that were being sent back to the families that remained in Qwaqwa in order for them to survive. And we know kind of the impact that migrant labor has on social well-being. It really kind of ruptures families, of course, for extended periods of time. But it's actually kind of the bedrock then of the so-called Qwaqwa economy.
We are an extremely overpopulated area. Our municipality is roughly about, according to Statistics SA, about 330,000 odd. It is probably closer to 500,000 inhabitants. So that puts a lot of pressure in terms of what the local government can do, making provisions for services, water, electricity. There's quite a backlog. For me, the mountains are not only home, but they are my office as well. I am very much in love with nature. Basically, my work is around community development, and I am an environmentalist at heart. Most of the work that I do within the environmental space is based around waste management and biodiversity. We are the only alpine zone in the country. We are probably the highest settlement in the country. While there are advantages in the mountainscapes, there are disadvantages, especially around the areas that are available not only for residential purposes, but for also agricultural purposes. Just the geographic limitations. We don't have very much arable land. One of the problems with having agricultural development in terms of livestock owners is the problem of overgrazing. And with the problem of overgrazing comes the problem of soil erosion. One of the projects that we have is that we would like to have special designated areas for our livestock owners, what you might refer to as feedlots. One of the other aspects is the protection and conservation of our very endemic local and indigenous medicinal plants, and then obviously the protection of our water sources.
Qwaqwa sits at the base of one of the major water resources of South Africa. In fact, the Maloti-Drakensberg mountains account for about 25%, a full quarter, of South Africa's freshwater supply. So just above Qwaqwa, on the top of the Drakensberg mountains, is what's known as Montauk Sources, essentially the mountain of sources. And there are 6 rivers that originate from up there. But in the shadow of these mountains are these kind of deep economic and social issues. And many of them are legacies of colonialism, settler colonialism, apartheid. But some of them also have to do with the failings of local government over the past 30 years since the advent of democracy. And Perhaps one of the ways in which this is most starkly illustrated is through issues around water.
We have a big water struggle in Qwaqwa. So whenever the mountains, as it's raining, we're like, yes, water. If it's snowing, we're like, some sort of H2O.
There's a stream I collect water for my children to drink from, you see. We have been trying for a couple of years to have that water reach the community because Qwaqwa is ironically going through a water crisis. There's no water coming from the taps. So we've been trying with our community to perhaps gather some pipes and some JoJo tanks to be able to channel the water from the mountain and bring it closer to the village here. So I do spend a lot of time there just thinking about how best to get that project underway.
When I came back here home after varsity, looking around the rivers and the mountains and streams, I started to realize that there was a problem with waste management to the extent that it was actually damaging our environment and actually taking away from the tourism attraction because our area is a tourism hotspot, and the non-existent state of waste management was actually appalling. So this is just a typical example of the state of many of our rivers in Qwaqwa. This is just a combination of waste material, as you can see, and there's sewage spilling into this particular river, and most of this will find its way downstream to dams like the Val Dam with regards to our local municipality. Now there's no waste removal for about 70% of the households. This is why you find this river in the state that it's in, because there are no alternatives in terms of waste removals or disposal of waste. The infrastructure around raw sewage has not been upgraded for close to 2 decades, and most of it has collapsed. This raw sewage is running into our rivers, and I dare put my head on the block and say that it has contributed to much of the cholera outbreaks. I started engaging community and local government with regards to implementing waste management. This is around 10 years ago. I'm still struggling to implement waste management, as I try to allude that municipalities are still implementing curbside collection of waste, which obviously doesn't address waste management as a concept.
Here, there's also a poor livelihood portfolio. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to expand livelihood indices for the community using available resources that can result in community tourism, that can result in food security, that can result in employment generation at a local level, basically catalyze local economic development. One of the things that you identify with most mountain communities is they are remote. We get to a point where we really need now to use local resources to change livelihoods and connect Qwaqwa with the global and national economy.
I think water, it's symbolic of the challenges that Qwaqwa faces, but also of the potential. If just this could come right, so that Qwaqwa actually benefits from where it is physically, it could start to promote kind of perhaps more investment in the region, the type of investment that actually matters, the type of investment that would create jobs, for instance, and improve people's lives, not ski resorts and so on, not these kind of vanity projects.
We usually talk about asset-based community development. And when we speak of assets, people think of natural resources, your water, your land, and so on. But the people, the youth, the region is quite young. Thinking of developing and putting Qwaqwa on the map, we're going to have to find ways of tapping into the youth as well. Because that's where innovative ideas are going to come from. That's where, the future lies.
But we need our production industries in Qwaqwa to really take care of this unemployment, and that should also result in the resuscitation of the firms. There were a lot of firms in the 70s and 80s which were supported by the state. Once that state support was taken out, then unemployment just shot up. The local economy has assets to regenerate itself. There is need for an integrated approach to really ensure that the services to support industrialization are there. Clean water, reliable electricity, the resuscitation of that belt of firms, and incentives for people to come and invest.
The rate of degradation of land, particularly within mountains, given the changes in climate, is kind of degrading the value of the land, but also the economic services that can be harvested. So firstly, we need to preserve, probably restore, so that we can maximize our returns.
That is a daunting prospect, knowing that we already, like as of now, we're already dealing with a whole lot of challenges pertaining to energy and water provision. So if we don't change the course as far as climate change is concerned, regions like this one are going to be highly affected.
At the heart of it, or at the core face of some of these challenges, are the mountain communities, which have shown resilience, which have shown adaptation in the midst of vulnerability. So there's a lot that they are doing, which we need to factor in. And it doesn't matter whether those mountains are in Lesotho, Appalachia, Himalayas, or the Drakensberg. The most important thing is, what are they doing to keep it together in the face of climate change?
The Wits is a community conservation area that's been worked on for so long. I think it's taken 10 years now.
Yeah.
And we're just waiting now for the Free State Provincial Office to basically sign it off. This landscape then would have a legal status with traditional, the Royal House governance. And that's a nice mix of common laws and natural protected environment. But
initially, we were somewhat opposed because, if there are documents that we need to sign as a traditional council to say, yes, we are giving you certain rights, it kind of translates to say, no, now we are giving over our land to you and we no longer have protection. But it needed some engagement and some education and, some sitting down and us seeing the pros and cons, the advantages that we're going to get and whether those disadvantages that we foresaw are a reality or not, and after sitting down, after so many years, we realized that no, it is more for our gain than it is for our loss. It is more to ensure that what we have, what has been passed down through the generations, remain.
For many people, it's a tourist destination and nothing else. But in actual fact, if you were to just peek around the corner of the mountain peak that you may be kind of lining up for a magnificent shot, you'd realize there's 400,000 people living. There's these kind of social histories, these social realities that go with the Drakensberg Maloti Mountains that I think people should be aware of as citizens who are concerned, I guess, for the future of this country and for the future of all of its people.
So the overarching shared vision that both the traditional authorities, the Qwaqwa, the Bakoena traditional authorities, and the Afro-Mountain Research Unit have in common is that we would like to set up the natural protected areas within our region of the Northeastern Free State, Drakensberg Mountains, because under the umbrella of a natural protected area, which is obviously legislated under the National Environmental Management Act, we would be able then to set up an area where we'll be able to protect the environment.
So my 4-year-old daughter, 2 weeks back when it snowed, we came here, Heritage Day, just to see the snow and to see the mountains, because that's what I remember. People saying Qwaqwa Tabadi Mahla, so it loosely translates to snowy mountains. So that's how I always knew Qwaqwa. So that's how I want her to see it, as pristine as I can get her to see it without her having too much influence on how messed up the municipality is, because that kind of changes the perspective of her wanting to actually stay here. Some people have never left Qwaqwa, so all they know is mountains, right? It's very different from the other provinces in the country. And I just want people to know that it's not just Qwaqwa, the poverty-stricken, messed up municipality that everyone sees on the news, but there's also so much beauty in the animals that we have, so much beauty in the people.
We need to collectively ensure that where we live, we take care of the environment, the animals, the plant life, and the community in general, and how we treat and engage with one another, to restore the dignity of, yes, the people and the habitat.
The history that is attached to it really cannot be overemphasized. So we do have a wealth of the role that the mountains played in all the generations before our time. But we do want them to exist also for the next generation that is coming after us.
Mountain communities here, friendly, awesome people. I compared with mountain communities also in Zim, for example. Friendly, awesome people. So there's something about mountain people that you don't get anywhere. The concept of the mountain itself, at least it's not one mountain, it's a string of mountains which you can explore, enjoy, and ultimately identify with.
Between Qwaqwa and Lesotho, the mountains were this kind of natural boundary that served the purposes of the colonial state at that time to kind of demarcate and separate. But they're not just that, they also act as bridges. We know that Basotho live on both sides of the border. Families live on both sides of the border. There's these deep histories on both sides of the border. And really central to all of this is, of course, the mountains. There's these undercurrents of our history that are very much alive and well in these places. And we should be aware of that. We should be alert to that because it's part of who we are. And if we do want to kind of move this country forward, these sorts of places matter as well.
These mountains are not barrier, at least not as perceived by the communities here, because they will tell you this is a vestige of what happened politically in our history, but they've always seen themselves as one people. So these mountains, essentially, for the people of the region, have always been bridges.